This is a beginner level coding, so this is for most people who don't know anything about SQL, but you should have a basic understanding of database tables, table structure, because we're going to be talking about querying from those tables, the columns in those tables, and we'll actually do a join at the end of this presentation as well. To begin with, we're going to use the select statement. And the select statement is probably going to be the most common statement you write. There's a few things here. The select can do a few things by itself, and then the format of the query is what we're going to use for all of our examples. I'm going to use the AdventureWorks 2017 database for this example. So for the select statement, if you're in Management Studio, you've probably already done this. You go to the table, right click on the table, and you do like a select top 1000 rows. And this just brings back all of the fields from that table, except it limits the results to the top 1000. Now that's not specifying any method to sort this by. We could do that later on. It's basically saying the first 1000 records that comes back, I want you to display those only and skip the rest. Now in this case, you can see the formatting is similar to what we're going to use. The formatting is vertical, and this is what I prefer to write in as well. We're going to get rid of some of these. So each one of these has a comma. Management Studio puts the comma before. I actually prefer to put the comma after. That's just preference. You're going to do what you prefer, but we need that comma in order to specify the fields, the separation of fields, except for the last one before the from statement. So in this case, we're selecting the top 1000 business entity, national ID number, login ID, and organizational node from the human resources.employee table. So there's something else we can do with this. Instead of specifying the actual fields, we could just put an asterisk here and just do select top, and the asterisk means anything. So if you execute that, it's just going to give us the same number of columns that are in there. Basically select star, select anything, select asterisk. People word it a little bit different. We could take out the top 1000 and just type it this way. We'll get rid of this comment too. Select anything from the human resources employee table, and you're going to get the same thing. There's approximately 290 rows in that table. Another one I want to mention right off the bat, because we might use it in one of the example queries, is distinct. And many times you use this to create a list. So we can use something like the job title to specify that we only want to see one value. And if we go and query just the table, we will see that there's more than one in here. We've got multiple research and development engineers. We've got multiple marketing assistants and marketing specialists. Some of these are duplicated quite a bit. The distinct allows me to pull just one of each one of these records. So let's do that. We'll do a select distinct of the job title. And now I see no duplicates. So as I said, this is very useful for making a list. In this case, we got 67 rows. So that means there are 67 different job titles. There should be no duplicates in this result set. Now before we go on to the next section, I want to talk about the aliasing and the brackets. You're going to see, and this is what the Management Studio does this by default. So just so there isn't any confusion, we're going to format things in this manner. And you see these brackets that are around these fields. So the reason there's brackets is you can separate or identify that business entity ID or national ID number. You can specify that that is a field, and that's the name of the field inside the bracket. Now the reason they do this is because there are defaults, such as login is one of them. If you were to type in login, well, there's a login that the system uses, that SQL server already has defined. Now this usually works in a SQL query and in Management Studio, but to make sure that you're getting, and you're not going to get strange errors, and you're getting the actual field, you can put a bracket around it specifying that this is a field that you actually include in the query, and you're expecting it to come from that table. So also, this is used because you can do spaces, and I usually recommend don't use spaces unless you have to, but there are developers I've run into that actually they'll name a database with spaces or put a date in it. It's just horrible. So you can have spaces in your name, and this would count as a field. So you can create a table that's called have spaces in your name with the spaces in it if you want to. Most people don't do that because it can cause a lot of confusion with writing your queries. But in order to do this and to identify that field, you're going to need to put brackets around it in order to encompass the string and the spaces. So as we go, we're going to start to rename some of these fields where we do something with it, and that is called aliasing. And we're just going to do this on a couple of these fields here. So for example, the vacation hours, we could pick on that one, and what we do is we add the word as, and then we can type something in like VAC HRS as a summary, maybe an underscore, something like that, and then a comma to end that line. This renames the field in the result set, so it'll say vac underscore HRS for the field that is vacation hours. Let's see what that looks like. So instead of vacation hours appearing at the top of this column, you see VAC underscore HRS. And this is useful for when you start to work with some of these fields. You might do some math, you might do some averaging. We're going to look at averages and sums and counts. And the field no longer represents the name that you're querying. So modified date, maybe you just wanted to say date instead. So you can do as date. And now the result set will come back and say date for that field instead of modified date. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start to look at the math next. So let's take a look at that. Now SQL Server offers plenty of mathematic functions. There's a lot of functionality built into the language, so you don't have to do the math yourself. You don't have to do the subtraction, addition, division. So we'll just use some basic select statements. Something like, let's add 2 plus 3 plus 5, something like that. And we don't need any table names or anything like that. SQL will do the math for us. We can also do the multiplication, and SQL will work just like a calculator, where it'll operate on the multiplication first before doing the addition and subtraction. So 5 times 8 is 40. 49 minus 2 is 47. So and we also have parentheses. As you can see, this is just like your calculator, or just like some of the expressions in something like Excel. SQL will do the work in the parentheses first, and then do the multiplication that's outside the parentheses. And you also have to watch for negative numbers, because you can do a 2 minus 7 as an example. We'll do the same thing, 3.5. And you'll see down here that now we have a negative number. So keep in mind that just like with a calculator, it doesn't know, it's not a mind reader, it doesn't know exactly what you're looking for. So you have to pay attention to what you expect the result set to be. We also have division, or let's do a decimal here, 1.7. And you'll see that it also returns a decimal point. So if you're doing math in some of these fields and you're dealing with a data type that is an integer, and you're expecting an integer, but you get back a decimal, you may get an error, depending on what you're doing with that field. And of course, you cannot do the divide by 0. Sorry, SQL didn't fix that. So when you execute that, you're going to get an error. Luckily, the results for the other ones still display, so you can still see the results from the other statements. So you can see how something more complicated can be created, especially if you're trying to use some fields or some data from a table. You're going to be pulling that data out, multiply it times 2, let's say, and then maybe you need to add these numbers together and then subtract 14. SQL can handle it and give you your decimal in this case. So these are just some basic math, very easy to use. We're not working with fields yet, but that's what we're going to get to next. We can actually query some of these fields and apply the averages, or we can add them together, or we can just count them. For example, this is a common query for counting the number of records in a table. Select count, and there's that asterisk again, which is anything, and you get 290 rows, or the number 290. And it doesn't matter if I put a field in here, since there's that many national ID numbers, I'm still going to get 290. And then another one we can look at is adding them together. We have the sum, and this might be something for this might look familiar to someone who uses spreadsheets, where you add the sum of a row. So we're looking at, let's say, sick leave hours. We want to see the total number of sick leave hours for all of our employees. So 13,139 hours have been taken by our employees. Now, the next obvious question is, well, now just like with the count field, the sum field works the same way. We can add a where statement to that, and we could say the where the login equals somebody, and then we'll get the sick leave hours for that individual. So sum, and then we also have the average, and average is just what it sounds like. It's going to add up all the numbers and divide that by the total count of the numbers. So in the case of the vacation hours, this would be the vacation hours for all of the employees. So the average happens to be 50. So I added all the hours up, and then it divided it by that 290 record number, and it gave you that vacation hours. And we'll use the national ID numbers. I think we have more numbers here. So this is the lowest number that is saved in the database for the national ID number. And obviously we have the exact opposite, which is the max. The maximum ID number, and this is the highest number. So it's just the minimum and the maximum for that field. This can also apply to a date. For example, we could look at the hire date. So this is the minimum or the earliest hire date that we have in the employee table. Then we can also do the same thing with the max. And this is the latest date, or the the newest employee for the company. So a span of 2006 up to 2013. We can also use strings, not just numbers. Login ID, for example. This might not be a good example. Let's try it anyway. Okay, login ID. The Adventure Works is a domain, but you need to look at this Allen 0. So if we do the max, this is the minimum, so the max would be something towards the end of the alphabet. And it is. We got a Zheng, Z-H-E-N-G 0. So in this section, we took a look at the select statement, some of the options, such as distinct, the top alias, aliasing those fields, and using the brackets and why we need to do that. We also went over the math. We went over basic math, adding fields, adding numbers to fields, and how to do some basic mathematical functions. Next, we're going to take a look at strings and go over how to manage them, read them, pull values out of the middle of a string. Please leave your comments. Don't forget to subscribe, and thanks for watching.